What's up, Taiwan? I'm Reece with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. A Taiwanese man on death row has had his sentence commuted to life in prison. It's the first such case since a September ruling reviewed the constitutionality of capital punishment in Taiwan. Cadence Caranta reports.
2 years after killing 8 people, including his own wife and children, one man has escaped a death sentence, which has instead been commuted to a life in prison, a major turn in one of Taiwan's most high-profile murder cases. The man set fire to a tire store in Hsinchu back in 2022, killing 8 people, and initially was sentenced to death for the crime. His sentence was reduced today after judges ruled that he's since shown remorse for his crime, even attempting to take his own life while in custody. Family members of the victims gathered outside the court today to express their disdain over the court's decision in an extremely emotional press conference.
如此重大的罪犯都可以免死，那真的是法死了。
The question raised by that relative of the victims about when is appropriate to use the death sentence is a question that's been raised by others in Taiwan recently. In September this year, Taiwan's then 37 death row inmates brought the topic of capital punishment before the courts, arguing the right to life was enshrined in the Constitution. The courts ruled that the death penalty was partially constitutional, but that its scope should be narrowed and only used in the most serious cases. Today's ruling appears to be a narrowing of that scope, and while there are voices on both sides of the debate, surveys show that 80% of Taiwan's public is in support of the death penalty. But despite its popularity, it seems it may start to be implemented less than before. Alex Chen, Joseph Wu, Reece Ayers, and Cadence Caranta for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's presidential office and China's Taiwan Affairs Office have responded to concerns about a surge in Chinese military activity around Taiwan. It's the largest deployment of China's Navy in the region in decades. But China has stopped short of officially announcing any drills, a ploy some say is meant to keep Taiwan on edge. Tiffany Wong reports.
A sudden spike in Chinese military activity close to Taiwan. On Wednesday, Taiwan's Ministry of Defense reported 53 Chinese warplanes near the country. That's the largest single-day number since October, when China sent a record 153 aircraft in response to Taiwan President Lai Ching-te's National Day speech. A day earlier, some 90 Chinese ships were seen in waters around Taiwan. It's the largest naval fleet China has deployed in almost 30 years. Taiwan's presidential office says these apparent unannounced drills represent an alarming and destabilizing development.
中国这样的行径是对印太区域安全稳定现状的公然破坏，更是对国际社会投入不安的变数。
In the past few years, China has grown increasingly aggressive in conducting drills in response to what it views as separatist activity by Taiwan, such as exchanges between government leaders. And many expected a Chinese reaction after Taiwan's president recently spoke with U.S. officials while transiting in Hawaii and Guam during a tour of the country's Pacific allies. But it's unusual for China to carry out maritime drills unannounced, which is what appears to be happening this time around. When asked about the military operations, China's Taiwan Affairs Office remained tight-lipped.
对猜测性的对这种没有根据的猜测，我们没有评论。
Since Monday, Beijing has set up 7 temporary reserve zones along its coast, spanning 1,000 kilometers off the coastline of Zhejiang and Fujian provinces. These sorts of restrictions on civilian and foreign vessels are often a sign of military exercises taking place, but no official announcement has been made, and Taiwan's defense ministry says it has not detected any live fire in these areas. The ministry says the Chinese ships' maneuvers appear to be practiced for a blockade of Taiwan, and that the operations are disrupting international trade. For now, authorities in Taiwan remain on high alert as they monitor how the situation develops. Howard Zhang and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
South Korea's former defense minister reportedly attempted suicide while in detention over his alleged involvement in last week's brief martial law declaration. An official said Kim Jong-hyun is in stable health after trying to take his own life. Kim remains detained while prosecutors mull formal charges. The head of South Korea's national police was also arrested today, and the presidential office was raided as investigations into the martial law declaration expand. President Xiaoliuqiu surprised many by declaring martial law on December 3rd, only to rescind it 6 hours later. Yoon has not been seen in public since Saturday, when he apologized for the declaration. An attempt to impeach him failed to reach the required two-thirds majority in the country's parliament. Danish company Orsted has sold half its stake in one of Taiwan's offshore wind farms for more than $1.5 billion. Greater Changhua 4 is part of a larger 920 megawatt wind farm project. The 50% stake was bought by Taiwan's Cathay Life Insurance, while Orsted will continue to own the remaining half. The move is part of Orsted's major reorganization aimed at restoring investor confidence in the company after a string of losses and project cancellations. A proposal to open the service sector to migrant workers has angered labour activists already on hunger strike over government policies. They say officials are making decisions without consulting workers, and that workers won't stand being ignored any longer. John Van Trieste reports.
Labor activists gather across from the headquarters of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. For 3 days, they've been camped out by the Labor Ministry demanding changes to the law, from better overtime pay to the return of public holidays cut from the calendar. Some are even on a 100-hour hunger strike. As they see it, though, far from listening, ruling party officials are adding to the list of grievances. And so they've stepped away from their camp this morning to protest, hoping these officials will see their anger. What set off this morning's protest are fresh reports officials have floated the idea of opening Taiwan's service sector to migrant workers in a Tuesday night meeting with business interests. There would be conditions. Local workers' salaries would have to go up first. But these protesters are skeptical.
那它是会每年提升，还是一次性提升？而且有没有规定最低要提升多少？而不要只是丢一个新闻出来，搞得好像是他说了算。
They say migrant labor is something that needs to be properly assessed beforehand. They're concerned about local workers being pushed out of the service sector, which they say is often a safe backup for those who lose their jobs or can no longer do them due to age. Lastly, they are frustrated at what they see as a double standard in the government's treatment of labor versus capital.
增加国定假日，还有提高加班费率，政府都会一直强调必须要有社会共识。那我们工会团体就想问，请问我们现在卓院长除了跟商总讨论以外，有没有跟哪些工会团体有讨论过？ 那这就是为什么让我们绝食的代表觉得说，对卓院长来说，我们的行政院、我们的执政党，是不是跟资方团体说好了，就是社会共识？
Protesters don cardboard cutout masks representing the president, labor minister, and moneyed interests, with the labor minister and president working to keep these interests happy. After this performance, the protesters head back to their labor ministry encampment. No official or party rep has stepped out, but they say they aren't done yet. In fact, the chief hunger striker says they intend to get louder about their demands.
12月21号，我们会在自由广场有一个公务部门的员工自己自办的尾牙，会有活动啊。然后1月2号我们会有一个尊严修法联盟。
And even just today, these groups have more planned, starting with a protest against workplace bullying back at the Labor Ministry. Whether they get an official response or not, this small but animated group says it isn't going to be quiet anytime soon. Scott Huang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
New official data shows real wage growth in Taiwan has outpaced inflation, marking the highest growth in 4 years. Average real regular wages adjusted for inflation rose by 0.5% in the first 10 months of this year. Real total wages, which include overtime and bonuses, increased by over 1.8%. Both figures represent 4-year highs. But another figure is causing concern. Almost 70% of workers are earning below average regular wages. Officials are pointing to Taiwan's high-paying electronics industry, which has been booming, with more bonuses being handed out, skewing the numbers. So exactly how well are people doing in Taiwan's tech-reliant economy? Well, to find out more, Joyce Tseng spoke with fair wage advocate Roy Nung.
Should we be encouraged by these record high employee pay figures?
From a short-term perspective, it is encouraging to see that real wages are rising to cope with the inflation, especially since the crisis over the last few years. But if we look at it over the longer term, Taiwan's real wages have actually been growing much slower than most other advanced countries. When Taiwan look at wage increases over the last many years, when we think in terms of minimum wage increase, we think in terms of how it should be pegged to economic growth or inflation. But we do not think about whether it is adequate for basic living. A large swath of Taiwanese workers are actually earning much lower than the basic wage necessary. So even if real wages are increasing, they are not adequate to keep up with the overall cost of living for basic necessities in Taiwan.
Why is it that there's such a huge gap between the highest and lowest earners, and how can we expect the non-tech sectors to keep up?
A huge issue with how Taiwan's wages at the bottom are still stagnant and not growing fast enough is because minimum wage is not growing fast enough. When government officials tend to position it as the manufacturing tech sector earning higher wages and therefore it's more beneficial, the positioning neglects the fact that we should be looking at how the tech sector is growing at a normal rate or even still at a relatively slow rate, and that the services sector should be the one that should be catching up with the tech sector. What we're seeing is that in Taiwan, because minimum wage is growing so slowly, there is not enough push upwards to push wages in the services sector to grow.
New Labor Ministry data shows that employees in Taiwan worked more hours this year than last year. How do working hours and overtime fit into this picture of how well workers are doing here?
Taiwan's work hours are actually one of the longest among the advanced countries and in the world. If we do look at the correlations with life satisfaction, work engagement, fertility, it shows that there is a significant correlation in that workers are more unhappy, they feel that they do not have enough time. It also decreases the intention to have children, and this impacts on Taiwan's long-term as well. There are economic and social impacts. Income inequality drives higher social unhappiness, less trust towards other people, and also less support for Taiwan's democracy, which is very important, especially for Taiwan, to defend itself from external forces such as China. So Taiwan's government needs to take a lot more comprehensive look in terms of how it grows the economy that looks at it from a more inclusive perspective, more equal perspective.
That was Roy Nung, a fair wage advocate speaking from Taipei. Coral coverage has sharply declined around southern Taiwan's Xiaoliuqiu Island, a government report has found. The report blames local tourism and county agencies for the decline. Experts point to excessive development and activities like snorkeling. Xiaoliuqiu introduced fees and other restrictions on tourists earlier this year in the hope of protecting local ecosystems against over-tourism. Coral reefs are declining around the world as ocean temperatures and pollution increase. Droves of venomous Venomous have washed up along Taiwan's east coast. The blue jellyfish-like sea creatures were pushed ashore by strong northeastern winds. Beachgoers are being warned to wear shoes while walking along the coast and not to touch the balloon-like zooids.
是因为脚踩到，听到啵啵啵啵啵的声音。任职6年当中，就今天最多。我会跟那个游客说，然后我们自己清，像我今天是清洁。
Venomous tentacles deliver a painful sting and in severe cases can cause death. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally today, check out these festive Christmas decorations from across the US. I'm Reece. Take care and see you next time.